Okay, so today we're going to be looking at some selected questions in biology, and there are 30 questions in all. So let's start with number one. The very first question: the cell organelle in which ATP synthesis occurs is A. Nucleus, B. Mitochondrion, C. Ribosome, and D. Lysosome. We know that ATP is the energy currency of the cell, and ATP is produced in the powerhouse of the cell, which is option B, mitochondrion. So the cell organelle in which synthesis of ATP occurs is definitely mitochondrion. And just for emphasis, if you look at option A, nucleus, that is the organ that controls the activities of all other organelles of the cell. Not only that, ribosome, the major function of ribosome is protein synthesis. And not only that, option D, lysosome. Lysosome is also called suicide bag, and it is the cell organ that contains hydrolytic enzymes. So basically, lysosome helps in digestion or destroying dead or worn out cells in the body. So the correct answer for number one is option B. Let's go to number two. Which cell organelle aids phagocytosis? To start with, phagocytosis occurs when a pathogen, be it a bacterium, a virus, or a fungus, is detected by the body, and then it is engulfed by white blood cells. And then the lysosome now comes in, attaches itself to such a pathogen, and actually release the hydrolytic enzyme to digest and break down such a pathogen. So the cell organelle that aids phagocytosis is definitely lysosome. And like I've said earlier, another name for lysosome is suicide bag. So the correct answer number two is option A. Let's go to number three. The chromosome of a bacterium is present in the dash. We know that chromosome is that thread-like or rod-like structure that carries the gene. And by the way, the exact location of a gene on a chromosome is called the locus. So the chromosome of a bacterium is present in the dash: A, nucleus; B, cytoplasm; C, tonoplasm; and D, centriole. First things first, we know that all bacteria are categorized as a prokaryotic cell. And what's a prokaryote? A prokaryote is always lacking membrane-bound organelles like nucleus. So essentially, the chromosome of all bacteria are present not in the nucleus, but in option B, cytoplasm. So the chromosome of a bacterium is present in the cytoplasm. And if you look at option C, tonoplasm is simply the membrane of a vacuole. So the membrane of a vacuole is called a tonoplasm. And if you look at option D, centriole plays important role in cell division and the formation of spindle fibers. Not only that, centriole also serves as a template for the development of locomotory organs in organism. Flagellum, for example, the template for it is centriole. Cilia, for example, flagellum is the locomotory organ in an organism like Euglena, whereas cilia is the locomotory organ in an organism like Paramecium. So the correct answer for number three is B. The chromosome of a bacterium is present in the cytoplasm. Let's go to number four. In sponges, the mesodermal layer is absent. This shows that they are A, radially symmetrical; B, bilaterally symmetrical; C, triploblastic; and D, diploblastic. Now, in organisms, there are usually three layers: the outermost layer, ectoderm; the innermost layer, endoderm; and then the middle layer, which is mesoderm. So any organism that possesses these three layers, the outermost one, ectoderm; the middle one, mesoderm; and the innermost one, endoderm, we refer to them as triploblastic. Even from three, you can see triploblastic. But the question here says that in sponges, the mesodermal layer, that's the mesoderm, is absent. So if the mesoderm is absent, how many body layers are we having remaining? Just two. The outermost one, the ectoderm, and the innermost one, the endoderm. So that makes it to be diploblastic. Another example of an organism. So the correct answer for number 4 here is definitely option D, diploblastic. So sponges only have ectoderm and endoderm. It does not have mesoderm. The same thing, hydra is another example of an organism that is diploblastic, because in hydra possesses the outermost layer, the ectoderm, and the innermost layer, the endoderm. It doesn't have the middle layer. What it has is a fourth layer, which is called a mesoglea. So sponges, hydra, both of them are examples of diploblastic organisms. So the correct answer for that one is option D. If you are looking for examples of a triploblastic organism, start from flatworms. All flatworms, like tanium sodium, is a triploblastic organism. All nematodes, like hookworm, for example, like Ascaris lumbricoides, is also triploblastic. Talk about annelids, like earthworm, is also triploblastic. Talk about snail, mollusca, is also triploblastic, and so on and so forth. But sponges, that is, the phylum to which sponges belong to, is Porifera. All organisms that belong to Porifera are diploblastic. All organisms that belong to the phylum Coelenterata or Cnidaria are also diploblastic. So triploblastic organisms are found from Platyhelminthes all the way to Echinodermata. Let's go to number 5. An example of an organism that makes its own food through inorganic materials is dash. A, virus, B, euglena, C, bacteria, and D, green plant. Now, the temptation, if this question is not fully understood, the temptation will be to go with option D, and that will be wrong. Because if you're focusing on the fact that an organism that makes its own food, we know that green plants are autotrophic organisms or holophytic organisms, and they make their own food. However, from where do they make their own food? From organic substances, not inorganic substances. An organism that manufactures its own food from inorganic substances like hydrogen sulfide, is an example of bacteria. That is why bacteria are said to be chemosynthetic or chemosynthesis. Chemosynthesis is a type of autotrophic nutrition in which an organism manufactures their own food from small inorganic substances. So that should not be confused with green plant that primarily manufacture their own food from organic substances. So the distinction between the two of them is the food manufactured through inorganic means? If the answer is yes, all organisms that are manufacturing their own food from inorganic materials are categorized under chemosynthesis, and that is bacteria, usually sulfur bacteria. So bacteria can manufacture their own food from sulfur, hydrogen sulfide, and the rest of them. So if the food is manufactured from inorganic material, then that will be chemosynthesis, and bacteria carry out chemosynthesis. The correct answer for number 5 is C. Let's go to number 6. Which of these is a carnivorous plant? A, mimosa, B, firefly, C, sunflower, and D, pitcher. The full name for pitcher would be pitcher plant. First things first, what's a carnivorous plant? Now, carnivorous plants are also called insectivorous plants. Even from that name, insectivorous plant, those are the plants that trap, capture, and digest insects in order to absorb nitrogen from them. These kind of carnivorous plants are found in soils that are deficient in nitrogen deficient soils. And there are several examples of them. Pitcher plant is an example, so you can see that the correct option for that is G. Not only that, you have bladderwort, you have sundew, you have all these Venus flytrap, and so on and so forth. So you must be able to know that carnivorous plants are sometimes called insectivorous plants. Not only that, you must note also that carnivorous plants are not just found in any area. They are only found in soil that are deficient in nitrogen. And the features that they are able to use to trap insects so that the digest insect absorb the nitrogen from them to supplement the nitrogen that is deficient in the soil. So an example of such a plant is pitcher plant. Other examples are Venus flytrap, bladderwort, and so on and so forth. So the correct answer for number 6 is definitely option D. Let's go to number 7. Ostoria are characteristic features in dash. Now, Ostoria are only found in parasitic plants. Remember, just like we have animals that are parasitic in nature, let's look at tapeworm. Tapeworm is an endoparasite that lives inside of their host. Not only that, we also have plants that are parasitic as well. And any plant that is parasitic will have a feature called ostoria. And ostoria are used to actually absorb nutrients and minerals from the host of such parasitic plants. So ostoria are parasitic features of what we refer to as parasitic plants. And out of these options, even from the previous example, which is number 6, I mentioned the fact that pitcher plant is an example of what? A carnivorous plant. Bladderwort, which is option C, is also a carnivorous plant. Venus flytrap is also a carnivorous plant. The only one out of the options A to D here that is a parasitic plant is a doda plant. So the correct answer for number 7 is doda plant. So anywhere you see ostoria are parasitic features that are present in parasitic plant like doda plant or cassiter. Let's go to number 8. The mode of nutrition of sundew and bladderwort can be described as that. If you remember in number 6, I made mention of sundew as an example of an insectivorous or carnivorous plant. I also made mention of bladderwort, which is also another example of a carnivorous or insectivorous plant. What do? They ingest insects. It's not as if that particular insect is the food that they feed on. No. These plants, these insectivorous or carnivorous plants, they have chlorophyll. They can manufacture their own food. The only problem they have is the soil in which they are found have little amount of nitrogen. And we know that nitrogen is necessary for development of chlorophyll, just like magnesium and iron are also necessary for chlorophyll development. So the only thing they need the insect for is to digest the insect and extract the nitrogen from them so that they can use that to manufacture their own food. So the mode of nutrition in sundew and bladderwort are simply autotrophic in nature because they possess chlorophyll and they can manufacture their own food. The only reason for them in trapping this insect is so that they can absorb the nitrogen from them and use them along with the sunlight, chlorophyll, and so on and so forth, and water to manufacture their own food. So sundew is an insectivorous plant, bladderwort is an insectivorous plant, and they have chlorophyll and they can photosynthesize. So they are autotrophic in nature. If you look at human beings like you and I, we are holozoic. We practice holozoic nutrition because we take in solid food substances. That's holozoic nutrition. What about amoeba? An amoeba sees any food, approaches it, we spread out the pseudopodia to engulf it, isn't it? That is also holozoic mode of nutrition. If I think about saprophytic, that is a form of nutrition in which certain organisms feed on dead, decaying organic matter, like mucor, like rhizopus, like fungi. They practice saprophytic nutrition. What about option D? Chemosynthetic. I've mentioned that earlier. This chemosynthetic is a form of nutrition in which certain organisms like bacteria manufacture their own food. From what? From simple inorganic substances. But for sundew and bladderwort, they have chlorophyll, they can manufacture their own food, and because of that, they are autotrophic. Another name for autotrophic is holophytic. So the correct answer for number 8 is C. Let's go to number 9. The first step in the process of photosynthesis is that we know that photosynthesis usually occurs in 2 stages. We have the light stage, we have the dark stage. The very first step in this particular photosynthesis, or more precisely in the light stage, is the excitation or activation of chlorophyll. That's the very first thing that happens during photosynthesis. When plants are exposed to sunlight, and when they trap the sunlight, the chlorophyll become excited or activated. After the activation, then there is photolysis of water. But the question is asking the very first step that happens, and that is option A, activation of chlorophyll. It can also be called excitation of chlorophyll. So for number 9, the answer is A. And by the way, photolysis of water is just the breaking down of water into hydrogen ion and hydroxide ion. It is only photolysis that oxygen is released from that particular water molecule. So once again, for number 9, the correct answer is A. Let's take a look at the 10th question, number 10. The product of photosynthesis are, now we know that during photosynthesis, there are two major products. There is a one major product, and then there is a byproduct. The main product, the immediate product of photosynthesis is glucose. And then the byproduct is what? Oxygen. So the correct answer is definitely option D. The products of photosynthesis are glucose, that's the immediate product, and oxygen, which is a byproduct. So we know that the raw materials that are used by green plant for photosynthesis are water and carbon dioxide. Water and carbon dioxide are some of the, is not even some, they are the two major raw materials needed for photosynthesis. But we also have other factors that are internal factors, like enzymes. For example, enzyme is an internal factor, like chlorophyll is an internal factor as well. So the correct answer for number 10 is D. Glucose, the immediate product of photosynthesis, and oxygen, the byproduct of photosynthesis. Let's go to number 11. The oxygen given off during photosynthesis comes from dash. The other time I was explaining photolysis of water, and I did say that photolysis of water is the process whereby a water molecule is broken down into hydrogen ion H plus and hydroxide ion OH minus. And it is from the hydroxide ion now that the oxygen is released. Let's take a look at the board. When water is broken down during photolysis, this H2O, and then sunlight, then we have H plus, then plus OH minus. That's photolysis of water. Then from this hydroxide ion comes the oxygen now. OH minus now produces water, oxygen gas, and then electron. And to balance it, we have 4 air, we have 2 air, and 4 air. So we can see that oxygen that is given up. So the oxygen that is given up is coming from hydroxide ion, and the hydroxide ion is definitely coming from water molecule. So the correct answer is option A, water. The oxygen that is given up during photosynthesis definitely comes from water, option A. Let's go to the 12th question. Photosynthesis pigments include, now the main pigment of photosynthesis is chlorophyll. However, there are other pigments that can also be used to photosynthesize. Option A, chloroplast and cytochromes. B, hemoglobin and carotenoid. C, melanin and hemoglobin. And the correct answer, option D, chlorophyll and carotenoid. So chlorophyll is the major. We have chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B. Chlorophyll is the major pigment of photosynthesis, but there's a particular pigment also called carotenoid. Now, if you look at some fruits, if you look at carrot, for example, that particular yellow coloration of carrot is due to this particular pigment we're talking about here, carotenoid. So the two pigments of photosynthesis here are chlorophyll and carotenoid, option D. Let's go to number 13. Which of these uses energy from the sun to manufacture its own food? Now, the question is indirectly asking us, which of these is autotrophic? Because it's only an autotrophic organism that can use energy from the sun to manufacture its own food. A, Anabina. B, Nitrobacter. C, Nitrosomonas. And D, sulfur bacteria. The correct answer, the only one that is a plant on the board, is Anabina. Now, don't be confused by option D. Even though sulfur bacteria can manufacture their own food, do they use sunlight? They don't. What they use, as a matter of fact, that is why we call it photosynthesis. The word photo comes from light, from the sun. But in the case of sulfur bacteria, they carry out chemosynthesis. That is, they don't use sunlight. They use chemical substances, inorganic chemical substances. That's what is called chemosynthesis. So the correct answer is option A, Anabina. And we know that option B and C, they are actually some of those bacteria that help in nitrogen fixation, isn't it? So we know that Nitrobacter, for example, we convert nitrites to nitrates, whereas nitrosomonas will help us in converting those nitrates into nitrites. So that's for that. The correct answer for number 13, once again, is anabaena. Let's go to number 14. Stunted growth and poor root development are a result of deficiency of. Now we know that if you take a look at the options A to D, sulfur, iron, calcium, phosphorus, these are elements, and we know that during plant nutrition, apart from the fact that plants need water to be able to carry out photosynthesis, they need light to be able to carry out photosynthesis, they need carbon dioxide to be able to carry out photosynthesis. Apart from that, they also need some minerals in the soil for proper growth and development. And these minerals are classified into two. You have those minerals that are needed by them in large quantity. They are called macro minerals. Examples are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, iron, magnesium, and so on and so forth. We also have such minerals that are needed only in minute quantity, in small quantity. They are called micro minerals. Examples are cobalt, for example, molybdenum, boron, zinc, copper, and so on and so forth. But out of these four options on the board, the element that is the mineral that can lead to stunted growth and poor root development is definitely option C, calcium, because calcium is necessary for the development of the cell wall in plant. And if calcium is deficient, then that will lead to poor root development. So let's take note of that. Now, at times, you can be asked questions like, which of the following elements is necessary for the formation of chlorophyll? There are two major elements that are needed for the formation of chlorophyll, and these elements are iron and magnesium. Most importantly, magnesium. Without magnesium, chlorophyll cannot be formed. So if magnesium is deficient in the soil, for example, that particular plant will have yellowing of leaves, what we refer to in biology as chlorosis. Chlorosis. So the correct answer for number 14 is C. Deficiency of calcium causes stunted growth and poor root development, whereas deficiency of magnesium will cause yellowing of the leaves. Let's go to number 15. The dark and light stages of photosynthesis occur respectively in the dash. Now, the dark stage occurs in the stroma of the chloroplast, while the light stage occurs in the grana of the chloroplast. So if you look at the option, you can see that the correct answer is what? That's going to be the dark stage happens in the stroma, and then the light stage happens in the grana. So that's option B. That's stroma and grana of chloroplast. So once again, the dark stage happens or occurs in the stroma of chloroplast, whereas the light stage occurs in the grana of chloroplast. So the correct option once again is option B. Let's go to number 16. Deficiency symptoms of iron in diet causes dash. Now, I was talking moments ago about the fact that all these plants require minerals like iron to make their chlorophyll, like magnesium to manufacture their chlorophyll as well. Not only that, humans, animals also require these minerals, either in large quantity, macro minerals, or in small quantities, which is micro mineral. For example, iron is one of those minerals that are needed in the body of animals, humans inclusive. And without them, a lot of things begin to go wrong in the body. For example, iron is a component of hemoglobin, isn't it? And we know that hemoglobin helps in the transportation of oxygen in the body. So if iron is deficient in the diet, we would naturally expect that it can cause anemia. So the correct answer for number 16 is anemia. Now, if you take a look at option B, that's osteomalacia. Osteomalacia is one of the deficiencies of the mineral calcium. When calcium is deficient in the diet, it can cause rickets in children. It can cause osteomalacia in adults. Let's take a look at option C, scurvy. Now, coffee is a deficiency of vitamin C. The same thing with gingivitis, that's bleeding gum. So, deficiency of vitamin C causes not only coffee, but also gingivitis. What about pellagra? Pellagra is a deficiency of vitamin B3, what we refer to as niacin or nicotinic acid. So, once again, the correct answer for number 16 is iron. When iron is deficient in diet, it causes anemia. Don't forget, deficiency of a particular vitamin called vitamin B12 can also cause anemia. This time around, pernicious anemia. So let's take note of this thing. So once again, number 16, the correct answer is A. Let's go to number 17. Mineral salts in the animal bodies help to dash. Now, I was talking about mineral salt like iron, calcium, iodine, because mineral salt help the body in a lot of ways. Iron helps in maintaining a proper cell, a proper blood volume. That's why if iron is deficient, as you can see in the previous question, it can cause anemia. What about iodine? We need iodine for the proper functioning of the thyroid gland. If it is deficient, what happens? Goiter results. What about fluorine? We need fluorine in small quantity because they help to prevent tooth decay. Isn't it? What about calcium? We need calcium in large quantity actually because they are necessary for the development of healthy bone and teeth. So the question is asking us, these minerals that I've mentioned, calcium, iron, fluorine, iodine, what do they do? Mineral salts in the animal bodies help to dash A, promote chemical reactions, B, build new cells and replace old ones, C, regulate metabolism, and D, provide needed energy in the body cells. So looking at these options, the appropriate one to choose would be to promote chemical reactions. Because if you look at option B, that's the function of protein, isn't it? It is protein that actually help to build new cells and to replace old or worn out ones. And if you look at option D, provide needed energy in the body cells. That will be the function of what? Either carbohydrate is an energy giving food, or even fat and oil, because fat and oil actually provides more energy per kilogram than carbohydrate. So the correct answer for number 17 will be option A. Number 18 now. The muscles that prevent antiperistalsis is dash. Before we go to the option, what is peristalsis? If you understand what peristalsis is, then we'll be able to know what antiperistalsis is. Now, peristalsis is that involuntary movement of food down the throat. Now, food are supposed to go down the throat into the esophagus, from the esophagus into the stomach, from the stomach into the small intestine, duodenum, and so forth. Now, antiperistalsis is a process whereby there is upward movement of the food or the content of the stomach up into the esophagus and even into the throat. Most of the time, a person belches, and then you can actually feel that you can feel certain things in your mouth, showing you that some of the content of the stomach has actually gone up. It's actually very frequent in people that are having what we refer to as acid reflux, or all these people that have what in biology or in medical terminologies are called GERD. So people, at least when the acidic content of the stomach actually comes up, it can bring about this peppery sensation in the chest or all these heartburn and so on and so forth. And the correct answer here would be cardiac sphincter. Now, cardiac sphincter is that particular valve-like structure that prevents the movement of the substances in the stomach into the esophagus. So the junction between the esophagus and the stomach is guided by cardiac sphincter. So that's the correct answer. But if you look at option A, pyloric sphincter, that is the valve that actually control the entrance of the stomach and the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine. So the correct answer here is option B, cardiac sphincter. And by the way, if you are looking at option C, jejunum is one of the three parts of the small intestine. That's the middle part. The first part of the small intestine, duodenum, the middle part, jejunum, and the last part, ileum. So the correct answer once again is cardiac sphincter, option B. Let's go to number 19. The blood cells that are large, colorless, and contain nucleus is dash. Now, that should be nucleus. And nucleus is supposed to be spelled as Nucleus. So there is a problem with that particular spelling. So the blood cells that are large, colorless, and contain nucleus is dashed. As a matter of fact, there are two things that will tell us what the correct answer will be here. Number one, large. Out of the three types of cells that are present in the blood, the red blood cells, also called erythrocytes, the white blood cell, also called leukocyte, and the platelets, also called thrombocyte. The largest of them all is the white blood cell. Not only that, another thing that will tell us what the correct answer will be is it says contains nucleus. Mature red blood cells don't have nucleus. As a matter of fact, they lack so many cell organelles so that they can create space for hemoglobin for the transition of oxygen around the body. The same thing, platelets or thrombocytes also do not have nucleus. So we already know what the correct answer will be. So the red blood cell, the blood cell rather, that are large, colorless, and contain nucleus is definitely option C, leukocyte. That's another name for white blood cells. So let's go to number 20. Most carbon dioxide produced during tissue respiration is transported by dash. Before we go to the options, we know that during tissue respiration, carbon dioxide is produced in our tissues. And when they are produced in the tissues, remember carbon dioxide cannot be allowed to accumulate in the body. If they are allowed to accumulate in the body, they will dissolve in the body fluid and form carbonic acid, H2CO3, which will upset the delicate pH balance in the body, which will make the blood to be more acidic than normal. And remember that the blood pH needs to be maintained at approximately 4.0. But if carbon dioxide being produced during tissue respiration are allowed to accumulate in the body, that delicate balance would be upset. So what happens when tissue respiration occurs and this metabolic waste that is carbon dioxide is produced, they will be taken to the lungs where they are gotten rid out of the body. Then the question is, what carries majority? Because that's what the question is saying, most. All right, because there are two components of the blood that help in the transportation of carbon dioxide. Red blood cells, erythrocyte. Because most of the time, a lot of students do believe that the only function that red blood cell performs is transportation of oxygen. That's partially correct. Because even though the major function of red blood cell or erythrocyte is transportation of oxygen, red blood cell also help in transporting small amount of carbon dioxide. Now, small amount. Majority, almost about 75% of carbon dioxide is transported in the plasma, which is the correct answer here. So roughly about 25% of carbon dioxide is transported by the red blood cell erythrocyte, while most, the larger 75% is transported in the plasma. Don't forget, plasma is the liquid part of the blood. That is the blood component that makes up 55% of the blood. So the answer once again is option A. And if you're looking at option B, the major function, the only function of platelets or thrombocyte is blood clotting or blood coagulation. Now, there are two things that aid blood clotting. Number one is vitamin K, isn't it? That's why deficiency of vitamin K can actually cause or make the blood not to clot easily or make the clotting time to be longer than necessary. Not only that, another mineral called calcium also helps in blood clotting. So that's why deficiency of calcium can also lead to lower clotting rate. So let's take note of that. And if you look at option D, leukocytes, also called white blood cell. The major function of white blood cell in the body is what? They help to fight against pathogen diseases, disease-causing microorganisms. They help to defend the body's immunity. So the correct answer for number 20, once again, is option A, plasma. Let's go to number 21. The blood vessel that carries blood containing digested food substances from the gut to the liver is dash. Now, care must be taken here. What does the gut implies here? Because at times, the question could be structured in several ways. In place of the gut, it could be from the small intestine to the liver. In place of that, it could be from the ileum. Remember, ileum is the last part of the small intestine to the liver. It can also be replaced with the alimentary canal to the liver. So you can see the question could come in various ways. It could be that the blood vessel that carries blood containing digestible substances from the alimentary canal to the liver. or from the ileum to the liver, or from the small intestine to the liver. In all of them, we are talking about the same thing. And the correct answer is going to be HPV, which stands for hepatic portal vein. Another question that JAM do ask that regard this hepatic portal vein is the fact that hepatic portal vein is a unique blood vessel in the body. What makes it unique is that it is the only blood vessel, that is, hepatic portal vein is the only blood vessel that starts and ends in capillary. So let's take note of that. So the blood vessel that carries blood containing digested food substances from the gut to the liver is hepatic portal vein. So that's for that. Let's go to number 22. Oxygenated blood is pumped to the entire body through the dash. We know during circulation, there is what we refer to as systemic circulation, isn't it? Systemic circulation is the movement of blood from the heart to all parts of the body except the lung. That's systemic, right? Whereas pulmonary circulation is the movement of blood from the heart to the lung. But this time around, it says oxygenated blood is pumped to the entire, that's the whole body, through the dash. We know it's from the heart, but specifically where in the heart? In the left ventricle. That's the correct answer. As a matter of fact, it is because of this that out of the 4 chambers of the mammalian heart, left ventricle has the thickest wall because it has to pump blood at a higher pressure to far distances the entire body. So oxygenated blood is pumped to the entire body through the left ventricle, which is option D. Let's go to number 23. The function of lymph nodes is to dash. Now, before we look at the options, what are lymph nodes? Lymph nodes are part of the lymphatic system. As a matter of fact, lymph nodes perform function which is similar to that of white blood cells. What do I mean? What do white blood cells do? They help to fight against diseases and infection. Now, lymph nodes also help to filter out pathogens. I've actually indirectly answered the question because an example of pathogen is bacteria. A lymph node helps to filter out pathogens like bacteria, viruses, and so on and so forth from entering the blood vessel. And we have a lot of lymph nodes in the body. And apart from the fact that lymph nodes can help to filter out bacteria, which is the correct answer here, lymph nodes also help to produce lymphocytes. Don't forget, lymphocyte is one of the types of white blood cells, isn't it? Lymphocytes produce antibodies. Lymphocytes are involved in immune responses. So, an example of lymph node is spleen. As a matter of fact, the largest lymph node in the entire body is spleen. Not only that, we have tonsil. Tonsil is another lymph node. We have uvula. Uvula is another lymph node. So lymph nodes are majorly part of the lymphatic system, and they help to filter out bacteria. They also help to produce lymphocytes. So the correct answer for number 23 here is option B. Let's go to number 24. Lymph is richer than blood in that. From the explanation I gave earlier, it is evident that the correct answer here is C, because I told you that lymph perform a similar function like white blood cell because both of them actually help in defending the body against entry of disease-causing pathogens. So lymph actually contains more leukocytes in this case. So leukocyte because it actually produces a lot. I've told you that lymph actually contains a lot of leukocytes. Let's go ahead to number 25 now. Which of these substances is not involved in the transport of substances in the body? We know that lymph is involved in the transport of substances. Plasma, I've told you that plasma transports most of the carbon dioxide in the body. Even apart from that, plasma helps to transport even metabolic waste products. Not only that, plasma transports hormones and enzymes, and so on and so forth. What about erythrocyte? Option D. Erythrocyte helps in the transportation of oxygen around the body. The only blood component that is not involved in the transportation of anything in the body is leukocyte, white blood cell. The only thing that white blood cell or leukocyte does is to help to fight against diseases and infection, nothing more. So the correct answer for number 25 is C. Let's go to number 26. Human height is an example of a feature that depends on both. Now, human height is an example of a morphological variation or continuous variation. And we know that human height is controlled by two things, the genotype, isn't it? Now, if a person is tall, that is partly responsible for the gene that particular person has gotten from the parents, isn't it? Not only that, a person who is tall can also be partly, what can be partly responsible for that is environmental factor. Environmental factor has to do with even diet, the kind of food a person eats. Maybe the person is free from disease and infection and so on and so forth. So the correct answer here would be option B, genetic and environmental factor. So for number 26, the correct answer is B, genetic and environmental factor. Let's go to number 27. A phenotype character with intermediate forms that can be graded from one extreme to the other is dash. That is a classic definition of a continuous variation. A continuous variation is a phenotypic character with intermediate forms and can be graded from one extreme to the other. Now, if I'm talking about continuous variation, height is an example of that, like I've mentioned earlier. Now, there can be two extremes. A person can be very too tall, isn't it? Even what does oversecretion of pituitary cause? Gigantism, isn't it? What about undersecretion? What is deficiency or undersecretion of pituitary cause? Dwarfism. Those are the two extremes. So you can say a person who is extremely tall, gigantic. You can have a person who is extremely short, dwarf. But in between, that's the meaning of intermediate form. In between these two extremes, you have people who are neither too tall nor neither too short, who have just of average height. That is what the intermediate form means here. So the correct answer here is continuous variation. Let's go to the 28th question. The shape of the human hair is an example of a dash. Now, the shape of the hair is due to the external part here. We refer to it as the hair pinna, P-I-N-N-A. So the shape of the human hair is an example of continuous variation. So that's that. Another name for continuous variation is morphological variation. Let's go to the penultimate question, number 29. An example of a non-heritable morphological variation is dash. Now pay attention here. Non-heritable, that is something that cannot be carried by a gene, because only characters that are carried by a gene can be heritable. And if you look at eye color is definitely heritable. You can inherit eye color from your parents. What about body size? You can definitely inherit the body size from the parent. What about the skin color? You can definitely inherit skin color from the parent. But the only thing that you can inherit that is not heritable is muscle development. For example, imagine a bodybuilder or maybe a wrestler who has well-developed muscles. If that wrestler actually gives birth to a child, that doesn't mean that the wrestler that is having a well-developed muscle that, okay, when he gives that to a child, that particular child is now going to be born with very big muscle, resembling that of the parent. That doesn't happen. As a matter of fact, if you go to variation, if you go to evolution rather, and you talk about the Lamarck theory of this evolution, you will remember that was one of the fallacious. As a matter of fact, that was the only fallacious statement that he made. He told us that part of the body that are constantly being used will become stronger and bigger. That was correct. And the one that are not being used will become weaker and atrophy. That was correct. He called that was what led to the use and disuse of body part. But he went ahead, and this was wrong, that all those, at least that acquire characteristics. What is acquire characteristics? If a person goes to the gym, your muscles, at least you acquire big muscles, isn't it? Now, he now went ahead and said acquired characteristics are inheritable. And that is wrong, because theories of genetics tells us that acquired characteristics are not heritable. For example, if a person, God forbid, went blind in one eye, does it mean that when that particular person gives birth to a child, and that the person is going to give birth to a child who is also one-eyed? Exactly, because that is an acquired characteristic. So acquired characteristics are not transferable, they are not inheritable. So the correct answer here is muscle development. It is not a heritable morphological variation. Let's go to the last question for today. Which of the following blood groups has no antibodies? First things first, we have 4 types of blood groups: blood group A, blood group B, blood group AB, and blood group O. Now, the person who brought about the idea of different blood groups was Carl Landsteiner. He was the one who divided this blood group into A, B, AB, and O. And blood group A, we have antigen A and antibody B. Blood group B, we have antigen B and antibody A. Blood group AB, which is also called universal recipient because it can receive blood from every other blood group, has both antigen A and antigen B, and it has no antibody. And of course, you know that is the correct answer here. And then blood group O has no antigen, but it possesses both antibodies A and B. So if the question was changed, and then the question now goes thus and says, which of the following blood groups has no antigen? What would be the answer now? That's blood group O. Blood group O do not have any antigen, but it possesses both antibodies A and B. Whereas blood group AB has both antigen A and B, but has no antibody. So that's that. And blood group AB, like I said earlier, can receive blood from every other blood group. Hence, it is called universal recipient. While on the other hand, blood group O can donate blood to every other blood group. And hence, it is called universal donor. And whenever contrasting antigens and antibodies mix together, there won't be any problem with clumping or agglutination. Clumping or agglutination, which is coagulation of blood by mixing of blood, is caused by the mixing of similar antigens and antibodies. Just to emphasize, the blood group that has no antibody is blood group AB. AB has no antibody, but it possesses antigens A and B. So we come to the end of the questions. So that's that.